Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Gavel Gang Podcast, an insight into the collections we get here at Ewbank's auction house in Surrey. I'm your host, John Silk, and I work here at Ewbank's auction house in the entertainment department, and I'm here with Alastair McRae, and he's head of entertainment at Ewbank's. What can you tell us about the Steve Oxenrider James Bond collection, one that's coming up for auction soon?
So this is a huge collection, probably one of the biggest collections in the USA. It came over to us about a month ago. We think at this stage, it's around about 2,000 lots. Ranges from Dr. No, the first James Bond movie, right through to No Time to Die, the modern one. And it's a really complete package of printed matter, posters, promo material, and everything else you can get your hands on related to James Bond.
Well, James Bond seems to be an evergreen icon, always sells, and posters and the records sell well as well. What's some of the choice lots coming up, some of the more exciting pieces of this auction?
So, yeah, as I said, most of Steve's collection is based around posters and printed matter. So a lot of the value comes on the poster side of things. So we've got the first poster from James Bond, the Dr. No British Quad. That's in at 12 to 15,000. We've also got a early Double Crown. It was released after Dr. No, and that's in at 8 to 12,000. We've got some other great lots, but I mean, do have a look online at the catalogue when it's out and you'll get a full list of what's there.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. Now, what's a Double Crown? I must admit, I don't know what that means. Can you enlighten us, Alastair?
So we've got a few different sizes of posters. So you've got a British Quad, which is the standard size for a British poster, which was displayed in the cinema. So these are your horizontal format posters. They would have been displayed outside cinemas, and they all measure 30 by 40 inches. A Double Crown is basically half that size, so 20 by 30 inches, and they were usually displayed in the foyers inside, usually as an advanced teaser, just because they're a bit cheaper to print because of smaller format.
So if we cast our mind back to, say, the 60s, Dr. No, these posters were in the cinemas. I'm guessing most of them would have been thrown away after the run of the film. Yeah. Anyone who saved them like this, hence the value, the rarity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we think probably at the time there was around about 2,000 Dr. No posters printed for cinemas all across the UK and Ireland. There's probably less than 500 remaining in existence. That's a guess on anyone's part, but there is, a big demand for the first James Bond poster.
Yeah.
I'm pleased this evening to welcome Steve Oxenrider to Ewbank's podcast in the entertainment department. Steve has consigned his lifetime's collection of James Bond memorabilia. There's everything from posters, lobby cards, stills, and everything else you may come across Bond-related in the collection. The auction itself is on the 16th and 17th of November 2023. We will be auctioning the items over 2 days. The first day we'll have posters and stills, and the second day we'll have all the other paper-related material. So I'm pleased to welcome Steve to the podcast. So please, Steve, do tell us a bit about yourself and the collection.
Thank you very much, Alastair. First of all, I greatly appreciate this opportunity to share with Bond fans and potential bidders a little bit about myself and the upcoming auction. I regret I'm unable to attend the auction in person, mostly because of the distance. It would have been really nice to meet the bidders and the Bond fans at a live auction, but instead you'll have to cope with my occasionally gravelly voice. I'm getting over a cold. About myself and why I enjoy movies in general. I grew up in a small town of about 3,000 in the state of Pennsylvania on the east coast of the USA. My hometown of Millersburg is on the edge of a rural farmland area called the Pennsylvania Dutch or German countryside, populated by the Amish and Mennonites. You might know it from the Harrison Ford film of many years ago, Witness. That was an introduction for a lot of people. Anyway, I grew up during the 50s and 60s, so I was there with Bond from the onset. We had one movie theater in town called the Colonnade, and a nearby drive-in theater that was open during the spring and summer. The indoor cinema had a change of movies about every 3, sometimes 4 times a week, and I was there constantly. As a child, I was obsessed with horror, fantasy, science fiction movies, Disney animated features. My mother especially didn't want me to go see horror films and so on. So I would always tell her it was a Cecil B. DeMille epic,
Yes.
Samson and Delilah, or something like that, something biblical, and then she was okay with that. One of the first things I do remember collecting were trading cards, or what we call bubblegum cards back in the day. And I also had a ton of Disney comic magazines, which I regret I parted with. I didn't really start collecting in Bond until I was 15, but a little bit more about that later. My parents never really had a lot of money, but they did have enough to send me off to college or university in 1968. So I had a deferment to avoid being drafted to fight in the war in Vietnam. I studied secondary education for 4 years at the university, and senior year, I enrolled in it was called a summer seminar program at the University of Madrid in Spain. Except for occasional trips the family would make to Canada, this was my first time outside of the United States. In addition to Spain, that summer there was free time to make side trips to France and the first time to the UK. I was already a James Bond collector by this point, so in Paris and London, I managed to sneak away from my travel companions to go check out film memorabilia shops. I remember buying some rare stills, black and white stills in Paris, and at a legendary shop, at least I understand it was pretty well known in London, called Fred Zentner's Cinema Books. They were terrific because they would always, whenever they got new Bond material, they would ship stills over, tell me to go through and pick out the ones I liked, and send payment off for them or return them. And also there was a movie jumble that had a kiosk or a tent that was called Treasure Trove. And I think that was pretty big back in the 60s and 70s.
I've had the joy of cataloguing the collection so far, so I do notice there's a lot of foreign material in there. Do you think by having sort of them travels as a sort of young man sort of influenced some of the collecting around the sort of foreign material you've got?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was being able to go into those shops. We used to have lots of shops in the States, especially in New York and Los Angeles. They're all but gone now because of eBay. But when I got my first, Diamonds Are Forever came out in 71.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after that, I got my first teaching job, and I had money to buy items I couldn't afford earlier. So about every 3 months, I'd drive to New York, which back then was a haven for movie memorabilia shops. And prices were somewhat affordable back then. Bond was big, but collecting-wise, prices were reasonable. They weren't outrageous as they are today. As you asked, I mentioned I picked up a lot through mail order, particularly overseas, of course. And I would send my wants lists or wish lists to shops in Florida, California, Texas. In Europe, it was mostly France and the UK, and they'd usually be able to find some interesting pieces. What happened after I got my job, I enjoyed teaching. In the back of my mind, I still was infatuated with my stay in Spain from 71. So I went back to visit in 1979 for what I thought would be a visit, but I withdrew all my retirement funds from Virginia and ended up living in Spain for 3 years. It was wonderful because I mostly tutored university students. And while I was there, I saw almost all of Spain. And then the last few months, I got a Eurail pass and visited a lot of countries in Europe. But in the back of my mind, all this time was my Bond collection, which was stored back at my parents' home in Pennsylvania. And I was in my late 20s, and I thought, this is fun, but I got to get back and get a steady job, a stable job, and earn a decent income. So I taught at elementary level public school. English is a second language. It's now called, here in the States, it's called English Language Learners Program for 32 years, and I retired in 2007. Along the way, in those 58 years, in addition to collecting, there were a lot of other pleasures that come with collecting. I suppose the biggest of those is world travel. I was inspired by, of course, by the international bond locales and had the opportunity. I think I visited 80 some countries now.
Wow.
Probably half of them are featured in Bond films. Lake Palace in Octopussy,
Mm-hmm.
in Udaipur, India. Piz Gloria on the Schildhorn in the Swiss Alps, the Basilica Cistern and St. Sophia Mosque in Istanbul. Still, for me, the almost like a pilgrimage to Mecca was visiting Loch Gilphead in Western Scotland, where the From Russia with Love helicopter chase was filmed. That was a dream come true. Also, a lot of friends. I made a lot of new friends through collecting, attending some of the Bond premieres in the US and the UK. I visited collectors in England, Spain, Japan, Canada, US, and what was then West Germany back in 1981. Bond collector Siegfried Tesche. I don't know if you would ever come across that name. Some of the other perks that come along with collecting, I had the unique opportunity to spend a full week at Goldeneye, the estate of Ian Fleming, the novelist, Bond novelist, on the northern coastline of Jamaica. Although he died in 1964, when I was there in 1989, there were quad crown posters and double crowns for several of the Bond double bills, because they would have come out after his death. Another standout was 2012 for the 50th anniversary of Dr. No. Are you familiar with Cinema Retro magazine?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yes, Dave Worrell and Lee Pfeiffer, the editors. The magazine is devoted to cult and classic films.
Yes.
They gave me the opportunity to share interviews I had done with some of the secondary players of Dr. No. And I ended up locating almost 15 surviving actors and musicians, all Jamaican, most of them still living in Jamaica. To them, Dr. No was just another job. And of course, at that point, no one was aware of, how successful the films would become. And when I explained, that the film was already 50 years old, it was beyond their comprehension. Even more so, I mentioned how it was going to be celebrated in the UK. Their memories and details for the interviews I did were sharp and as clear as yesterday. So that was, for a lot of readers, that was a lot of fun to go back and see 50 years later, some of the stars and the opportunities and the success that came with this series.
Yeah, so it seems to me you've based a lot of your love of Bond doing interviews and different features with some of the cast from previous films. Do you have one you remember more than others?
Certainly, the first two, almost back to back, was when I was still in high school. Harold Sakata had written a response in Playboy magazine, and all it said was Harold Sakata, Honolulu, Hawaii. And I was able to back then just call the phone directory, get the phone number, and I called them on a payphone.
Yeah.
My parents would have had a fit if I had done that at home. So a friend and I went into a payphone at a hotel in town. It took just about 3 minutes to put $9.45 of coins to do the phone call. And halfway through, the operator is telling Harold Sakata, who played Oddjob in Goldfinger, by the way, there was a young fan, obviously, calling, and he had to put money in. So he starts laughing and laughing. But he was very nice, very kind. Another one shortly after that was Lottie Lenu, who played Rosa Klebb with the hip dagger in her shoe in From Russia with Love. I called her several times. We had a nice conversation. This was shortly before I went off to college, but those were perks as well.
Yeah, no, you seem to very much persevere with getting in touch with people and companies. I could see a lot of letters you had wrote to various companies asking for any things they had from, their Bond advertising campaigns they were running.
Yes. In fact, we had something called the National Screen Service Corporation. They distributed all the material, TV spots, posters, and so on, press books. When back then, when you would write to them and ask for something, they would send it without hesitation, even if they knew you were not affiliated with a movie theater or anything. So I picked up a lot that way, but especially as you mentioned, by writing to for product placement, different toy companies and promotional tie-in and so on in the UK and the US, and picked up a lot that way with no expense at all.
And in terms of sort of your collection, is there one area that you particularly liked collecting?
Yeah, in the beginning it was probably stills, black and white stills.
Yes.
Before VHS or televised showings of the films, the only time you could really see a Bond movie was in the theater on its initial release or on a double bill. So to me, owning stills and posters as well, it was kind of like a tangible remembrance of the movie that you could take out, look at, display on the wall. I remember taking Bond posters to the university and putting them in my room in the dormitory, and people would be walking down the hall and they'd see it up on the wall, and they were really impressed and excited. Sometimes while I was collecting, even up until the end, I would go through different phases of collecting and concentrate on just one aspect. For example, for 1 or 2 years, I might search exclusively for LPs and 45s, singles. Another year, as you mentioned, it might be foreign material, front of house color stills from different countries. In fact, I think there'll be probably close to 1,000 LPs and 45 singles in the auction next spring. But for pretty much the last 20 years, I've focused on autographs and now have signatures of more than 2,200 different Bond cast and crew members. As I mentioned before, Lotte Lenya and Harold Sakata were the first. At the time, back in the 70s, 80s, almost unanimously, the stars were very gracious and would respond by writing photos I'd send, or they would send their own agency photo, theater program in which they show they might have appeared. And I really have to single out and commend the British stars especially. Some of them, actors mostly from the 60s and 70s, the earlier Bonds, had never even seen stills of themselves in the Bond movie.
Yes.
So I'm sure they were somewhat reluctant to sign a still and then return it to me, especially if it was the first time. So I would usually reciprocate by sending 2 copies. Later, as I would learn how to scan things, I would send copies along for them to keep. Over the years, like you mentioned, I've groomed some really wonderful, lasting friendships with actors in minor roles, from Dr. No right up through the latest, No Time to Die. And we talk on the phone regularly. I try to recognize, especially the ones from Dr. No, because like myself, they're up there in years. So it's nice to recognize certain holidays or their birthday and so on. So
us at Ewbanks had the pleasure of meeting Caroline Munro and Martine Beswick recently.
Oh, yes.
We had some afternoon tea with them, which was quite nice.
Oh, boy, that's...
and they're absolutely fascinating when you actually meet them in person and you can listen to the stories. Did you find there was sort of a Bond star or actor that left a big impression on you?
Oh, there's so many. I suppose the one that I had been looking for, of course, as you collect, you make up eventually a want list or wish list. There were so many stars in the Bond films, and I thought, these people are, England, the UK, there have got to be a lot of these stars around. So I was searching sometimes in England, and of course, they had left England, or they might have been living in Spain or in the US and traveled and ended up at a totally different location. I think the biggest surprise was, and it's a minor role, she's only in the film probably a total of a minute and a half. Dr. No, at the very end, when Bond and Honey Ryder, Ursula Andress, are taken to the Dr. No's lair, Crab Key, They're received by two nurses, Sister Rose and Sister Lily. Both of them had done, prior to Dr. No, Avengers and quite a few other films and TV shows. And it ended up, I called 3 places in the States, Yvonne Shima, who played Sister Lily. She was in Canada. For some reason, I just assumed she had been in the UK. Now, most people, if you mentioned Yvonne Shima, it wouldn't mean very much. She had done a lot of other films and so on. So that was a real pleasant surprise. And we still talk every few months. And there are a lot, for different reasons, I've found real fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's always, I always find it, fascinating when you meet actors and actresses outside of the movie and outside of their persona. You get to speak to them on a personal level, and it really sort of adds that extra touch to what you think of them.
Yes. I never really got into, for example, collecting with first edition books or movie props because I couldn't really afford them, or I don't have a lot of space. But to me, getting in touch with the stars and particularly getting autographs on material, when it's authentic, it holds a certain allure. It's almost like holding on to a living personal prop. Another moment that was a highlight of collecting, in 2012, I had the opportunity to go to Pinewood Studios, and I had found the 3 blind beggars at the beginning of Dr. No. There's only one survivor, Charles Edgehill. And I got in touch with him probably a year before. And I was able to take him along as a guest to a screening of Dr. No at Pinewood Studios.
Wow.
That was the first time he had been back since then. To be sitting next to him when his appearance comes up on the screen, and the fans there met him prior, in the lobby before the screening. When he came up on the screen, everyone applauded and so on. And he has 10 or maybe even 15 years on me. So, the appreciation he must have felt, I felt so good that to attend that day.
It's like you can touch the movie in a way sometimes, when you have these, stars in front of you from them. Like you say, instead of having a prop, by meeting someone in a movie, it gives you that, that feeling of you're some way connected to the movie.
And it's one thing that doesn't fail to please other collectors, even if they don't collect autographs. I've seen people, and I'm sure you've had them on auction as well, fans who collect posters with signatures of maybe 50 or 60 of the stars of the film. To me, I was always so afraid, if I would start doing that, I would misplace the poster somewhere along the line, have 1 or 2 many glasses of wine or whatever, and, then the poster would be gone. So
yes,
I stuck to just like one-on-one things. So unless I can get duo signings or something at a show.
And just out of interest, did you have your collection on display at home, or was it safely tucked away somewhere, or how did you look through
I would have to be honest to say most of it was in boxes, particularly and I never really had a lot of toys and games and so on. But what I had, I didn't have a display area, but I do have about 15 or 16 different size posters, from 11 by 14 lobby card size, 22 by 28, 27 by 40, 41 frames on the wall. And I would take the posters out and rotate them, I'd say every 3-4 months, something like that. And maybe as you went through them, you saw some of them are really hard, particularly the ones that are rolled. Might have been in the roll for close to 40 or 50 years. I thought at one point people say, what's all this sitting in a box? Why didn't you take it out? And it's very simple, unless you have the space. Now, I added a second story to my garage several years ago. So that gave me a little bit more space. But as far as putting it on public display, I might have loaned one or two items to people, probably for books, publications, or articles
Yes.
I had done. I spoke to one or two universities here near me and high school kids. You'd be surprised, one of the teachers asked if I would like to come in and talk about my James Bond collection. And I said, I'd be delighted to do it. But I was amazed, some of these kids, 15, 16 years old, they had watched the films and television with their fathers, or probably in a lot of cases, their grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew who Emilio Largo from Thunderball was, or names of Bond girls and so on. It was really amazing.
Yeah, I guess that's why the franchise is
and a lot of
has sort of kept going so much, because it's had so many reinventions, and it's kept and it's kept current all the way through.
Absolutely, yes.
In terms of the collection, do you have sort of a favorite item, or an item that was particularly a moment when you got hold of it, you kind of thought, yes, I've got it at last?
Well, no longer because it's all in the UK, but. Actually, that seems to me, and as part of the decision, to be more fitting that, the collection is there. Mm-hmm. But I do want to, the collection is gone now, probably a month or a month and a half. Once in a while, it'll come into my mind. I want to go out and see one of these things. And of course, it's not there. But my two favorite items are very, very simple things. I've always been partial to collecting paper, like posters, stills, press material, mm-hmm. and so on, as opposed to toys and games. The two items that I added to the collection at the beginning, in 1965, there was a 35-page U.S. souvenir program for Thunderball. In fact, there are two of those programs. One of them has different stills. There was the initial printing, if what I've heard is true. Mm-hmm. And then because of the phenomenal success of the series, they did a second printing, and they put different stills in the second time around. So mm-hmm. that program, and also there was a 68-page British program called James Bond 007 in Focus. The company, I think it was called Mervyn Brody and Associates. That program, especially the British program, had totally unique photos from the first three films I had never seen before. So for years, to me, I would take out the programs, look at them almost daily. Also, the 007 in Focus was the first British item I had in my collection. So those two things, were easy to get out, look at, and so on. Posters were a little bit more cumbersome because early on I really didn't have any place to put them or to display them. Other items almost on par, probably now certainly a lot more expensive, or value-wise or more expensive, were the various sized American posters and the UK quad crowns for the Bond double bills. I saw one of the ads you just placed was James Bond is back to back.
Yes. Yeah.
Seeing two Bond movies and the composite artwork on one poster, to me, just generated some kind of an excitement, almost like the first release of a new film. I would get as excited, when we would get a double bill, as if it were an original release. Here in the States, we really only had 6 official double bills in the 60s and 70s. I say official because they were the only double bills that warranted a press book, the different size posters, 1 sheet, mm-hmm. 3 sheet, quad or lobby cards, and so on. And you had in the UK, if I added correctly, I think you have 18 in the UK up through the mm-hmm. mid-80s, of course, ending with Roger Moore era. But yeah, those I would love to get out and look at from time to time. Another item I would take out endlessly to either thrill or probably often bore friends with were 5 reels over 4 hours of 16 millimeter original TV spots or ads, featurettes, trailers, and so on from 62 I think they started, they stopped doing TV spots for the Bond movies in 83 with Octopussy. The black and white spots, TV spots, especially from 62 through 65, are super rare and nostalgic to watch before we had color television. And I think those reels, I think, are in the second batch that'll be up for bidding in the spring.
Which has, as I mentioned earlier, it's just arrived in the UK shores. So
yes. Yeah.
I'll be looking forward to going through that one.
That was rather quickly.
I was thinking it was going to take much longer via sea, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes here in the States with the hard postmaster we have right now, it can take a month, to send a letter to Oregon or Florida. Wonder what the devil happened, along the way. Why it takes that long? Where you can send it to Europe and it's there, within a week. So.
No, I was interested to hear about your favorite items in the collection. I always found, first of all, when you start collecting, everyone's always amazed by the posters and the artwork. And then slowly, when you become more of a seasoned collector, you start to get really fascinated. I was always very fascinated when I got into looking at through the campaign books and exhibitors' leaflets and seeing the different items they would use for promotion. You'd nearly feel like you were there at the time by going through the campaign books.
Absolutely. And when you look at old stills and so on, I remember vividly seeing 8x10 black and white stills outside of movie theaters and lobby cards. And, that doesn't exist anymore. We don't even have movie ads in newspapers anymore. That's long gone. It's been several years since I've seen. Now, there may be in maybe New York or Los Angeles, particularly on weekends, they might feature in arts and entertainment section movie ads, but otherwise they're long gone.
No, I think, it's same here. Everything's just gone so digital now that actually having sort of printed material in your hand is nearly a thing of the past.
Oh, yeah.
Moving on to the collection, your reasons for wanting to sell the collection now and, how the decision came up to it, because I know it must be such a wrench to sell the collection.
Age, advancing age, health issues, those are deciding factors. And there does come a point when you have to be realistic and abide by the adage, you can't take it with you. I've seen awful things happen to people who not only collected posters, but other items, things being sold literally by the pound.
Yes.
And, antiques and so on. And I thought, no. I don't care if I don't make a lot of money. I just don't want it, thrown on a pile and burned or, trash discarded. So fortunately, I never got to the point where a passion for collecting became an obsession. My friends would say differently. I never thought of the collection either as an investment either until I was around 70. And then little by little, I was never really a completist as well. So, I didn't need to have every Corgi issue, that came out. And I'm not putting anyone down that does that. I admire them for doing that. I just had different areas of concentration and so on that I didn't collect on everything. So, or focus on certain things.
I've definitely found that, in terms of the collecting market, especially when it's more of a niche area, people are collecting, especially in the memorabilia side, they want to be in control of selling the collection, rather than leave it to, a spouse or a partner. They really think, right, I can control the sale of it. I can sort of watch it happen and I can be there to make sure it all, goes to the right hands.
That leads into what I was going to say, that certainly a heartbreaking and a gut-wrenching decision finally decide, to sell or auction the collection. And rather than attempt to sell individual items on eBay or to private collectors, that's why I decided on a reputable auctioneer such as Ewbank that was willing also to take the entire collection. because some places would only want this and that. And then I thought, well, then that's almost getting like eBay, where it takes, I'm going to end up having a lot of it here. Everything that I've sent over there will appeal to, people who, again, are concentrating or have a niche for certain items and so on. But most of all, I know each item, because it is an auction and people will be doing serious bidding. Each item will have a worthy new home and will be appreciated as it was by me. So there's a lot of satisfaction in that. Even though I don't have the collection, I'm still as excited about the Bond films as I was when I was 15 and started. I'm enthused about news and Bond 26 as I was, I suppose, with Thunderball back in high school. So that will never diminish. So
for me, especially, it's it's the whole excitement leading up to the release. You first of all, you get the little teaser, then there's the release of the soundtrack, then you get, an extended trailer, and then, it all builds with the promotional releases they do, all the merchandise. It just sort of keeps coming. So it's all the build up to it is nearly as exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the recent movie, No Time to Die. What were your thoughts on it?
Usually it takes a few years. I guess we're at that point now. Like wine, something has to vintage with me. To give you an idea, and I'm sure I'm not out of line by saying this, there are a lot of people that will admit the same. I probably have seen the earlier Connery films, most of them between 80 to 100 times each.
Yes.
A lot of times I was much younger and I go to the movie theater without falling asleep like I do now. But the most recent one, No Time to Die, I only saw in the theater, I think, 5 or 6 times. And it certainly gave a finality to Daniel Craig's era. I think the pre-title sequence with the Aston Martin, the motorcycle and Matera, the attack on the Heracles lab in London, and certainly the Spectre party in Cuba still had those highlights that stood out, and everyone would mention, especially the party in Cuba, that were very, very similar to the old Bonds. But they all, in No Time to Die, they all came within the first hour. The most iconic Bondian moments came within the first hour. And then I thought parts of the final hour drag a bit with very little tension. Over the years, in general, I think the series has kind of abandoned the fantasy element and the humor of the earlier films. I remember coming out of Thunderball, you only lived twice on an all-time high, an expression from Octopussy that we fully saw. But recent ones you come out through and you just want to, because even Daniel Craig made this, not comparison to the film, but slashing your wrists. The films were such downers at the end. Nothing really to come out and be real happy about. They all were so dark and gloomy. And now I realize the series have had to adapt to reflect realistic times, similar to the Mission Impossible and the Bourne films. Also, it's been a long time since a new Bond movie felt like a standalone action movie. I think now the films are more like continuing episodes where you had to see the previous films to know who Vesper Lynn and Mr. White are. Dyed in the Wool Bond fans, of course, will know, but people going in might not be familiar with certain characters. They're all going to know the names Q, M, Moneypenny. And of course, the big thing was Bond being gone, dying in the film, but also Felix Leiter and Blofeld.
Yes.
And I'm not sure any of that was necessary. It's an artistic approach, but the end credits do promise that Bond will return. So his death will set up a new chapter and challenge for the series. You might have seen, or it's come in the papers just last week, the series producer Barbara Broccoli said the next film will be a complete reinvention, but it probably won't shoot for probably at least 2 years. And I think that's another downfall. Bond needs to be kept coming out more regularly. I'm not only saying that because of my age, but there are a lot of fans, it can get almost to the point where there's such a generational gap that kids will not know James Bond is at some point.
Yeah.
unless they see them on television. So now I know with COVID, they had to push the release date of No Time to Die back, but the diehard fans especially, are really embittered, understandably so, for these long delays between films. And I think there are approaches they could do for the next one. Like Barbara Broccoli said, there's a lot of skepticism what's going to happen with the series, but the Bond series has always been very resilient. So, for the next one, Madeline Swan could be telling the daughter, Matilda, I'm going to tell you a story about James Bond, she says at the end of No Time to Die. And they could do flashbacks to Bond's early spy days. It's been rumored, of course, director Christopher Nolan would like to direct a Bond. And, I'm certain he would have an interesting new approach and probably maybe even attract a larger audience. Of course, then there's also been talk of making Bond a period picture, sticking closely to the original Fleming novels and the settings of the 50s. I don't know. I'm a traditionalist. I'd like to see a restart set in modern era, as all the films have been, and then select an actor for Bond, big name director, start with the gun barrel, and just do no further explanation as to continuity with the previous films. It's not like the Frankenstein monster where you kill it off and then it comes back. I'm sure back in the days of the Universal films, they didn't question, too much why the monster came back.
Yeah, you just move forward.
They can't question too much, why James Bond comes back. So.
No, I'm completely in agreement with you. When I was growing up, I was sort of between the sort of, 89, 95, where there was that big gap with License to Kill.
That was huge, yes.
The GoldenEye. And I just about remember License to Kill, but then the first movie was, GoldenEye. And I remember just being,
Were those your first ones you saw, or?
So GoldenEye was too young to go to License to Kill. And then the first one I saw on the big screen was GoldenEye. So it's always been, for that reason, a bit of a favorite one for me, really, because it was the first one I saw in the cinema.
Yeah, I think, well, you certainly the experience you had, that to me, that would be very disorienting. Yes. Not only to see a different Bond, but that stretch, because of course, back in the 60s, the films came out almost every 2 years. And if they didn't, they had a double bill. That explains certainly, why Bond in the 60s. I mean, there was constant barrage of exposure to Bond, but now it's so few and far between that it's, I think, hard to pick up new fans. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot more fans in the UK, Germany especially, Japan, I think, than here in the States. And I don't know. Fans still applaud and hoot and holler.
Yes.
when they see the films, but I remember, queues, lines to get in for the Connery Bonds. Sometimes you would wait. I know when Goldfinger came out at the DeMille Theater in New York was the first time, I think in the States at least, that the film ran continuously, 24 hours. People, just to meet the demand. The theaters stayed open a long time, but you don't see that anymore. Home entertainment has taken away a lot of that.
I was lucky enough to actually go to the most recent premiere. Have you been to many of the premieres over the years?
I was to a few in New York.
Yeah.
They're not nearly as lavish as Cubby Broccoli sponsored premieres for the Boys Club of New York.
Yes, I did see quite a lot of invitations in the collection.
Yes, yeah. The only one I was to in the UK was for Skyfall. All the ones to go to, that was, everyone really rants and raves about that. I'm trying to think. No, that was the only one I've seen, apart from the ones here in the States. So.
Yeah. No, they are quite a spectacle, aren't they?
Oh, they're incredible. The after parties and so on, and just amazing.
Have you got any sort of tips or pointers for any budding Bond collectors who are collecting now?
Well, now that the series is more than 60 years old, there's so much fan art coming out on posters,
Hmm.
even lobby cards. I've seen people putting composites of lobby cards together or double bills,
Hmm.
reprints, and so on. I would think for the younger novice collector, it would be really hard to determine what is even licensed or what was the original material. So by going on to auction websites like Ewbank's, eMovie Poster, Heritage, eBay, and so on, you can get an idea at least what you're looking for and not paying for some kind of a reprint or someone's fantasy of what a bond poster should look like. I'm tempted to say collect whatever makes you happy, but my advice is to limit what you're looking for and how much you want to invest. If you're going to buy something that has meaning for you. I bought a lot of the material for Thunderball when it came out because that was the
Yeah.
most recent film I had seen.
Hmm.
So if your first film was Moonraker or Skyfall, get the premiere program, get the posters, quad crowns, and so on, because in the end, they'll have a lot more sentimental value for you in the future.
Yes.
I still, of course, like getting things from the 60s and 70s out, but some other tips I would say try to get in touch with older, trusted, established collectors because they, like myself, might have material to sell or trade.
Hmm.
Some of the material I sent to Ewbank's, and that'll come in a separate box, is just a mishmash of things I've never had a chance to sort through. But I think you'll find some goodies in there that, did not make it maybe in the first shipment. So also collectors shows, celebrities and shows and so on. They often offer movie material, and those are good places to exchange wish lists or wants lists. I don't know if you have them. There are very, very few. I don't even know if I can name one. There's one, Larry Edmonds in Los Angeles, memorabilia shops where you can go in and peruse the actual material. Again, all of that stuff's gone because of eBay. Do you have many left in London? I know it used to be Vintage Magazine.
Yeah, VinMag, yeah, they're still around, but on a lot more of a scaled back affair now. But I do know they are selling on eBay slightly. I mean, I've always been, in terms of the autograph collecting, I'm a bit like you. I've always been someone who'd rather have it signed, in person for them. So I do try and go to a lot of the fairs and conventions. So you actually, get to meet the star, potentially shake their hand and, have an autograph. Yeah. And then it's something, you can nearly treasure that memory.
Yeah, that's nice to bring that out, and especially you get your picture taken with the star. Yeah. I guess the most recent one I saw was Jill St. John from Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh yes, yeah.
In near New York a few years ago. That was the most recent star I had seen. That memory still sticks into my mind because they always ask something personal. Because I took some super rare stills along. Originals, because I knew I was going to meet her, so I didn't mind her signing an original still. And then after she signed it, I hadn't scanned it. She said, "This is lovely." She said, "I'd love to sell more of these." She said, "Do you have a copy?" And I didn't. And there would have been an opportunity probably to get her home address and everything else. Bless her. I think the last photo I saw of her, she was wheelchair bound now. So I don't know if it's temporarily, but I felt so guilty for months afterwards. So I put a few contacts of people I know out in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
If they should ever run across her. And I got a still very, very similar. It was the same. I think it was probably off a contact sheet. So one other thing that I wanted to mention that I was guilty of, I never did it, but also when you buy something, either commercially or from a fellow collector or whatever, or even trade, authenticate the purchase with a receipt, the date you buy it, where you bought it, and so on, because you'll never know how long you're going to keep your collection.
Yes.
And in the future, memory might not serve you too well either. Because as I was looking through, I noticed there were a lot of items. I kind of had an idea what I paid for them. But then there are other items, that I might put a 14 by 36 insert for Goldfinger together. When I bought it back in the day, when nothing was vintage, everything was brand new. So I probably paid $3 for it in 65, 66 or whatever. Then I added maybe from Rush with a little lobby card, 22 by 28 or half sheet. I might have paid close to $500 or $600 for it. And it would still be with some of the vintage material, but unless I had written down originally, what I paid, memory fails me in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, especially with such a vast collection, I can only imagine how. But I mean, when it arrived with us, it was actually, it was well documented. It was, a lot of it was in files. It was all quite, in terms of some of the collections we get in, it was one of sort of the more curated collections, I should say.
Well, I had 3 people come here to help pack it and so on. And I don't want to vulture or hover over top of someone when they're doing their job, but these people knew, how to pack. I was afraid, they'd just pick up a whole rafter of 1 sheets and drop them in a box. But I hope when you open do you get to open them?
I got to open them. Yeah, I was there the day they arrived on the truck. And I mean, it all seemed like it hadn't really moved since it left you. So it seemed to be pretty well packed.
Okay, because that must be like Christmas morning.
Yes,
getting a parcel like that. But
I know, and there was probably must have been about 60 or 70 tubes, I would say, and all just stuffed full of posters. I know you had it all quite well documented with a numbering system, but when I tend to sort of get cataloguing, I just sort of dive in and get straight into it.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff I had, it's called a lateral file. When they got to that stuff, there was no way to get everything out neatly. So we just took the file folder out and they packaged them up. But the interesting thing was they were all intrigued, why I was collecting it, how long was so on. And I thought, I hope this stuff is at least going to leave Arlington, Virginia, and not be sidetracked somewhere. So glad to hear it all worked out.
Have you any plans for auction day? Are you going to watch?
I don't know what time, because of the 5-hour difference. What time would you start auctioning auction day?
So it starts mid-morning here. It runs rather slow now, so you can only maybe sometimes get through sort of 60, 70 lots per hour.
Yeah, I'll be awake. That would be 7 o'clock here, so I'm usually up by that time.
It'll probably run on into sort of early evening here, I would think, just with the amount of lots.
I think a lot of my friends here, close friends that don't collect anything, they're just curious to see how much money they think I can make. So they may register, encouraging them to bid on something, and they say, not from the prices I've seen.
Yes.
But there are some people there that collect art and antiques and so on, and they understand perfectly the value of items like that. So
it does really shock some people when they, find out that this cinema poster that, was maybe on a bedroom wall once is suddenly, worth 4, maybe 5 figures even.
It's come to a whole new level. It would have been inconceivable in my day. If you put a poster on the wall, it was something you bought for 59 cents, at Woolworths or, some department store, not an original vintage poster. There were people back in the 50s and 60s. I remember my uncle had a Marilyn Monroe 1 sheet. I can't even remember what the film was. And for years, it was on his office wall. He doesn't have any idea how much that poster is worth. So I went back, I think I was in college by then, to ask for it. And I was going to give him some money for it. And it was gone. And he said it was kind of risque. Oh, I know what it was. I think it was Niagara, the film with Marilyn Monroe with the waterfall. And his wife was kind of a prude, and she thought it was very risque to have in his office. So she tore it down. So often can try to visualize that poster in a garbage pail. So I'd like to just add a few.
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Again, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank everyone who's registered to bid in the auction, the James Bond auction, whether you're bidding online in advance or live, and also for your word of mouth promoting the auction. It's participation, especially of fans like you, and the interest that preserve the Bond legacy by not only attending the films at the cinema, but also by investing, preserving, and displaying the beautiful and rare advertising material that we all seem to love and appreciate, and also to retain this stuff, the memorabilia, for future generations to enjoy. Finally, a very special shout out to Dan Willis, real true friend and fellow collector, who's been a vital and dedicated link and resource for me between the UK and the United States. And thank you again very much for your very kind words, and the press, Alastair, for introductions and so on you do for the auction. So I appreciate that very much.
No, I would like to just thank you as well, Steve, for and Dan as well, entrusting your collection to myself and Ewbanks. And yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure going through it all. It's been a learning curve for me too. Some of the material there I've never seen in the flesh before, so it's been as I say, a pleasure. I'm sure it will do very well when it comes up to auction. And
again, you've been so resilient and kind, to cope with. Dan and myself trying to look at the genuine value of some of the items.
Yeah.
This really has been a great pleasure, it's awkward, to finally talk to you after all this time.
I know, yeah.
We haven't spoken before. And, I really didn't know much about, consigning material, to an auction house. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful because it's benefiting the auction, and it's going to benefit me as well by deeming me the world's biggest collector. There are bigger collectors out there, but I'm very happy, with what I've collected. I know all of these other collectors, and I probably know all the big Bond collectors. In each other's collections, we have things we would have been longing, to have. I tried to clarify it by saying, one of the world's biggest collectors, but I greatly appreciate your kind words and so on. So,
no.
Well, listen, thank you again very much for your expertise and taking care of this whole project. So I feel everything is very safe hands.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Alastair.
Bye.
All right, regards to the UK, okay? Best wishes to everyone and happy bidding.
Thank you for listening to the Gavel Gang Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please subscribe and take a look at the Ewbank's website for more information on this and upcoming auctions. Until next time, going.